Hello, and welcome back to the final episode of our podcast series, Unraveling the Revelation, Part 24. This is a detailed look at the influences on the Church of God's interpretation of the book of Revelation. I'm Dale Rood. We want to conclude our series by summarizing a little bit. And one of the purposes of this whole podcast series was to look at some of the influences that helped to shape the interpretation of the book of Revelation for the Church of God. I've listed some of those here on the right-hand side. There certainly are others that could be considered, but these are the ones that came to my mind as I was going through the presentation. The first influence, obviously, would be the influence of the Great Reformation with Martin Luther and the teaching of justification and how that fit within the overall interpretation of the symbols on our Revelation chart. The second influence was the first Great Awakening in the 1730s and 1740s, and that is with the participation of the Wesley brothers and their teaching on sanctification and holiness. We saw how that fit into the Protestant era on our Revelation chart. And so that helped to shape our interpretation, because that was seen as a progression in truth, a significant progression in truth. The third influence was the Second Great Awakening from 1790 to 1840, in which the holiness movement was very focused on this teaching of a second work of grace. Out of this particular Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, was the Restoration Movement, or the movement of Alexander Campbell, who was teaching the unification of all Christians as a single body. Brother Warner embraced that particular teaching in a very definite way. Also, as Brother Warner was part of the Church of God Winebrennerian sect, he formed a lot of his understanding under their teaching, particularly the teaching of one church, and the church name being the Church of God, and the ordinances. Now, I just mentioned that they were a sect. In theory, they were anti-sectarian, but as time went on, they became a sect or a denomination. And now they openly proclaim to be a denomination. The next big influence that we find that came from the Second Great Awakening was that of Adventism, where prophecy dating methods were created using Old Testament scriptures, and also the division of church ages into epochs, the beast in Revelation, and the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. All of these ideas were incorporated into Brother Warner's interpretation of Revelation in just a different matter. As far as the methods and so forth, he took the concept and then he applied it to his environment. And of course, we talked pretty much about the heavenly sanctuary and that was the heavenly sanctuary of the Adventist Church versus the Church of God, cleansing of the sanctuary, so to speak, being the come out of her message and come to one unified body. Therefore, the church would be cleansed. Also, the use of assigning numbers of years to symbols, even when not referenced or explained elsewhere in Scripture. For example, the 3.5 days equal 350 years. We do not find anywhere in Old Testament where one day was representative of 100 years. But we do find the principle of assigning days for years through the teachings of Adventism and also through the Old Testament. And then also we looked at F.G. Smith's being influenced by John Cummings' teaching on end times. And Cummings was a very anti-Catholic clergyman, and he had a sort of Adventist type of teaching. In fact, he was referred to by the Adventist leaders of his day. Also, the use of, and often the overuse of, Old Testament types and shadows. These are also influences that began to help shape the form of the Church of God's revelation. And as we talked, Brother Warner had used the wrong decree in one instance, and he used that for the start date of a type and shadow type of thing, and then even added 25 years to specifically get him to 1880. And as a result of some other types and shadows related scriptures, he ended up coming up with 1896 and 1941 as 2 days that he thought fit within prophecy. They were going to be significant, and we looked at those. But once again, all of those things were based on reading something in the Old Testament as a type, and then basically developing it into something that represented something was going to take place in the New Testament. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but whenever we find that it's being done and using wrong start dates, adding years to things, then we get into very questionable practices. And of course, in the case of predicting 1896 and 1941, his prophecy did not really come to pass. And also then Regal recognized what Brother Warner had done and did not include his dating methods in the cleansing of the Sanctuary book once Brother Warner died. So just another influence there. Of course, overall, the influence of Scofield and Larkin's, their interpretation on dispensation, dispensationalism, and also the use of charts. Brother Goodnight embraced their approach to seven seal, and he even used some of their dates, but he also made an application to his particular situation. So just looking at how they approached those 7 church letters, those 7 seals, how that was all broke out. Brother Goodnight took that same structure, used a few of their dates, but also came up with other dates. And then the other thing is just simply using current events. And I'm speaking specifically of things that was happening in the Anderson movement around the year 1930. So, for instance, F.G. Smith got voted out of office in 1930 as the editor, and he was replaced by C.E. Brown, who was viewed to be a more moderate editor. So that was just a current event, and in some people's mind, it represented a big picture of what was happening within the movement. And so 1930 found its way on our charts. The belief that the Church of God Reformation had apostatized and therefore could not have been the last big move of God, that was certainly something that was a current event. We studied pretty extensively and found that there was no prophecy related to the evening light being broken up into 2 separate church ages. But yet that is what happened. And so it became difficult to say, and with one hand saying that the Church of God Reformation movement was going to be the last Reformation, when we just said, okay, it just apostatized and had gone into compromise. So it couldn't be the last Reformation because that's not how this thing was supposed to end. And so therefore, the teaching of 7 seals came along, 7 church ages, and again, that was just an influence on the overall interpretation of the book of Revelation. So I didn't go into these in great detail, because my hope is that you will go back and visit those episodes and see, for yourself, what were some of the key influences as we went along that you observed. Now, as with most people's level of understanding, you're not saved and just given understanding of everything. We tend to progress in our understanding. The song we sing is "Pure Light is Coming Fast." Well, that same principle applies to the interpretation of Revelation over the years. There have been changes that have been made, and we've covered quite a few of those in this particular series of episodes. I'm just going to read them. Try not to provide too much commentary here. But the use of the 2300 years as a timeline to reach 1880, we don't use that anymore. Rigo identified it as a mistake that Brother Warner had made and took it out of the manuscript, did not include it in the final product. We don't even talk about 1896. We don't talk about 91 as prophetic years. Also, there was at one time some discussion, and Mohammedism, as they would say, or really Islam, had found its way on our charts. And for the most part, I don't think people refer too much to Islam on our charts. And then the explanation of 7 seals. Goodnight had a different description of what those seals represented than what Smith did. So there was an evolution of progress along that line. Whether you believe it or not is one thing, but I'm just saying that there was a definite change that took place. And the same thing is true for the explanation of the 7 vials. We covered both Goodnight's and Smith's interpretation of what those vials were. And one in particular I remember is the radio vial. Well, nobody talks about a radio vial today. So there have been changes to our understanding along those vials. Proclaiming the Church of God, Anderson as part of Babylon. Obviously, in the 6th seal, they didn't claim something like that. Even when Anderson was, going well and strong, it had the support of the Church of God. But as time went on, what was seen as the movement of God or a movement of God became referred to as part of Babylon. So just the overall change in how people felt about the Anderson Church of God movement is pretty significant. So for instance, 7 seal would teach that the come out message applies to the saints who are in the Anderson Church of God. Okay, and then some other changes. Assumptions, I think, down through the years have been made about what Luther taught regarding justification. And as you remember that, as we went through that section, no one today teaches justification as did Luther. And there were pretty obvious reasons for that. The same thing's true with Wesley. I think some people just assume that they teach sanctification like Wesley did without really having gone into and done the research and found out what it was that Wesley taught regarding sanctification. So we've just made some assumptions, and as time has gone on, some people have changed their view of sanctification, which has actually come more in line with what Wesley actually taught. And then there was this whole thing about 4 church ages versus 7 church ages. That's obviously a pretty big change. Dividing up the overall church age from the day of Pentecost until the second coming into either 4 or 7 separate church ages. So, once again, a change. Some people did not embrace that, and some people did. The alignment of the church letters to the church ages in a sequential manner. So early on, they taught that any of those conditions in those letters could exist to anybody, any church age at any time. But after a while, they began to be viewed as something that was sequential. So in other words, we're living in the 7th church age, which would include then the conditions that existed in the 7th letter there to Laodiceans, and that was overall the spirit of lukewarmness. So that's been a change. And I noticed too that we've stopped referring to dates. For the most part, people have stopped referring to dates on the chart as exact numbers. And most people will say, well, about this time this happened. And that works for some of the numbers, but some of the other numbers that would not work. For instance, if you have plus or minus 10 years on 270, nobody's going to notice the difference. But if you say plus or minus 10 years to 1880 and say that, in 1870 instead of 1880, then you would have Warner, who's still part of the Winebrennerian Church, and he would be part of a denomination. So that wouldn't sit very well. So there's some of those dates that have some wiggle room as we teach it, and there are others that do not. And I made the observation that I believe that this whole thing baselined 1880 as the starting point and then worked backwards to come up with the other dates. And I think we showed that. And then there's that little 10-day tribulation discussion that was in the Smyrna letter. Brother Goodnight had taken those 10 days and applied them to the third church age, the Pergamus age. And so that's how he ended up with 1,000 years of tribulation. So from 530 to 1530 is 1,000 years, and each day represented 100 years. Okay, but the problem was that 10-day tribulation period was supposed to happen in the second seal and not the third. So that was a discrepancy there. Some have now changed that to mean a particular 10-day period in that second seal time frame of where there was great tribulation and there was hard times that came on people, and so they made them literal days. And so anyhow, just another example how some people can take a symbol and say, well, it means this, and then somebody else could take a symbol and say, well, it means something literal. So we do have time from time to time. We've got people that don't agree on these timelines and even these symbols. A complete departure of the significance of 1880, the camp of the saints, and the hour symbol, and even the events leading up to it. Nobody talks about 1880 today. We don't talk about the camp of the saints. Some people I've talked to since doing this podcast didn't even know that there was such a teaching, because it's just not discussed anymore. It didn't happen. And so it's kind of hard to justify it when the whole thing didn't happen. And also the events leading up to it, and we discussed that in that particular episode as well. You can go back and review that if you want. Obviously, that's a pretty significant change that's taken place. The length of the preliminary judgment in the 6 and 7 seals. It was originally taught that it was a 100-year period based on the day symbol. Okay, so that took us from 1880 to 1980, but here we are in 2024. So, how do we deal with that? What we thought was a symbol of 100 years has proven that it was well beyond 100 years. And now we're on, 144 years, something like that. And so how do we say that there was only 100 years of preliminary judgment and then the end was going to happen? So nobody talks about that in that manner anymore. The identity and formation of the eighth beast. Brother Goodnight taught it, Brother Warner taught it to be a conglomeration of, I think, political and religious systems. Brother Goodnight taught it to be atheism, Babylon, which he had Catholicism and Protestant included in that, but did not have the Orthodox Church in there. And then thirdly, false holiness sects. So little holiness groups that were out there. Well, and he believed that was going to happen during this time of the camp of the saints. Well, obviously there's been a major change in the interpretation of that symbol. Nobody teaches that now. So now we teach the eighth beast is a combination of the first seven, the four government type of beast in Daniel, and then the three beasts in Revelation. Okay, and then also the doing away with the post-1980 7-year Great Tribulation teaching. Remember we discussed that about there being these 7 years from 1880 to 1887, and during that time, sometime during that time, there was going to be this Great Tribulation where this eighth beast conglomeration of people was going to be killing the saints and surrounding the camp of the saints, and unless God cut the time short, all the saints would die, would be killed. Well, nobody says that anymore. So again, another change. I know sometimes we like to think, well, this has always been taught this way. No, it's not been always taught this way. There's a lot of things that we believe today that have not always been taught that way. Maybe it's been always taught that way since you've been around, or since you've been taught. But I just gave you a list of a bunch of stuff about Revelation that at one time people proclaimed that have gotten that from God. And it didn't happen. And now we don't even talk about these things anymore. So, bottom line is we should be very careful when we think that we're speaking for God, or we proclaim to be speaking for God, and these things don't come about as they have been prophesied. We do destruction to the church, we do destruction to the message, and we lose credibility, as we should. So we need to be very careful going around saying, God told me this, God showed me this, and oh, by the way, if you don't accept it, you're going to be part of the pagan system and backslide and all that. That's what they were doing. That's the things they were saying. When all along they were wrong. So, just a word of advice there. Not a good idea to go around making those proclamations and saying things so definitively as though it came straight from God. I will say this, since I've been involved in this study, I can usually listen to somebody preach for a few messages, and I can pretty much tell you what book they got it from. They may stand up there and claim to have got it from God, and God showed them this, and God showed them that, but I can listen to what they say, and I can tell you where they got it from, which book they got it from, just because I've studied this stuff. So, it's one thing to really take an approach where we seek God's face for understanding of something and run that by other, brethren. Run that by people that are prophecy focused. See what they think about it. There's wisdom in a great number of counselors. That's one thing, but for just people to, get something and read a book about it and somebody said it, somebody that we love and we trust, and they said it, so it has to be true, and then claim it as truth, we get into trouble that way every single time. So, anyways, there's some changes that's taken place over the years. Okay, I listed a few areas that I think are worthy of further investigation. Some areas that I think would be interesting to look into. I don't have time. I'm moving on to some different things, and I'll talk about that here shortly. So I'm going to just read through these. These are kind of my observations. If anybody's out there that would like to take any of these up and go do your own research and studies, I'd be happy to help you along, give you the information that I have about it. But I think the first thing is that Brother Fay Martin, his books were very, very appealing to me. I knew Fay Martin from a perspective that he was an author of a book called A Veiling Prayer, but I had no idea that he was involved in the Revelation, and then he was a colleague of Brother Goodnight. And so he wrote his books, and I can tell you that his books are much easier reads than Brother Goodnight's and those other brethren. I don't know what his background was entirely, but his books were very easy to read, and he had a chart that was unique to him. I haven't seen any other chart like it, and I believe I showed that when we talked about him. So that's a good area someone could take on and do some more digging there. Also, I'd like for somebody to identify the names of the 310 people who left the Anderson movement when Earl Slacum pulled out or was ousted in 1948. I've got both of the 1948 and the 1949 yearbook. It'd be just nice to go through those and find out who those individuals are and make a list of them, because I'm telling you, there's probably going to be a lot of them on there that those of us under the Seven Seal teaching, we're going to recognize a lot of those names, because they ended up, while they didn't leave Anderson for purposes of the Seven Seal message, they ended up getting exposed to it, and some of them accepted it. Obviously, some of them didn't. But I just think it'd be interesting to do a comparison there. Also, I think it would be kind of neat to look at the differences between, or the similarities between, what Otto Linn was teaching in 1942 when he wrote his commentary, which included the book of Revelation. He had more of a preterist view, and this was published by the Church of God. And then Marie Strong wrote a book, actually two books, one of them in 1980, and then she collaborated with some other people to produce a book in 1996 that seems to me to be very similar to what Otto Linn taught. And again, the whole message that they were saying that the book of Revelation was warning to the people, the Christians, just before Rome took over and destroyed the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. So they view all those symbols as representing basically Rome and the emperor and the situation surrounding that, so that they were able to escape and none of the Christians lost their lives. So obviously a lot different viewpoint, but I would like to see whether or not those two authors there were saying the same thing. And then also I would like to see how that interpretation compares to something called the preterist interpretation, which is pretty much the same thing as I understand it. It's all about the prophecies being fulfilled once the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, and the whole Old Testament way of sacrifices and that whole dispensation was abandoned, and God left it desolate. So I don't know enough about the preterist interpretation to be able to say that that's what they were teaching. It kind of seems that way. I've looked into it some, but I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it. So it's just another area that would be kind of interesting to look further into. And then also Brother Richard Bradley, his teaching on Revelation, he was a very solid Church of God man, died not too long ago. And I know his interpretation does not seem to have a lot of the dates in it like we focused on. And the book itself is about 3 inches thick, and I've not been able to bring myself to spend time just sitting down and reading it. But that's something I'd like to do. And I've been in contact recently with some saints that have found his videos. They're actually online. I think I put the link on there. And they're really eating up the things he had to say. They're really enjoying it. And so that's just another area that could use some further investigation. Also, I just found a chart on one of F.G. Smith's chart and I believe it's his. I had it with his other charts, so it would have to be his, but I need to go back and verify it's his. But he did have that camp of the saints there at the end of the chart too. Now, it wasn't at the very end like we have it after, 1980. His is just embedded in the evening light time period. So I don't know exactly how he taught the camp of the saints, what that was all about, but that's another area I think would be interesting to look into. And then also to find out how Scofield and Larkin's, whether or not there was any influence on F.G. Smith's viewpoint and some of the dates that he may have used, or some of the events. I do know that there was a connection between Brother Goodnight's but I don't know about F.G. Smith. So just another area that I think is worthy of just a quick examination. And then we talked about Brother Emerson and this brother William Branham, how they taught that the parables and the seven parables kind of paralleled the seven church ages. And I would like to see how close their teachings were and whether or not there was some maybe awareness of each other's teaching. I'm not sure. It could be something that's completely independent of each other. I just haven't spent a lot of time looking at those details. And then also, I know that when I was reading Brother Goodnight's book, the first time I read it, it just kind of blew my mind, so to speak. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Some of the claims that was being made. Of course, back in those days, there was a focus on the Reds or communism. There was a lot of that stuff in there. And he would make some statements in there that was pretty far out. And when I read them, I was kind of glossed over them. But I would like to go back and dig into that a little bit more and find out some of the other events that he prophesied besides this whole 1980 and Camp of the Saints stuff. And then also, I think it would be really neat, since I've got 5 versions of Goodnight's book, the first being in 1933 and the last being in 1955. I would like to break those down and look at how the progress that was being made in those, how he expanded on those things and how his understanding might have evolved as time went on. I like stuff like that. I like to look at trends, and I'm a numbers kind of person, and I like to do analysis on this kind of things. And I think it'd be neat to just compare the versions. What got added, what got left out, what got modified, that kind of stuff. And then also, I still don't understand why there was discussion early on, and that discussion was in the 6 seal books, as well as some of the early 7 seal books. There was discussions about Mohammedanism, or really Islam. I don't even know why that made the chart, so to speak. Why that particular non-Christian religion made it, when there's no discussion about Buddhism or Hinduism and some of these other isms that are out there. I just am not sure why that happened, other than there was a direct conflict between, like during the Crusades, where there was a direct conflict between Muslims and Christians. So, but once again, I just think it's an interest area. And then also, I think it'd be kind of neat to do further research into the 3 earthquakes. That third one that most people believe has not taken place. It says a lot about it. It says it's, like none other ones. It's different than all the others. It's so great. And I don't know what that means. I don't know how it's different than the first 2. And I just think that would make an interesting study. And then also, I've never understood why we haven't included the Orthodox churches in our discussions on Revelation. Now, back in the early days, they did have a line on there that showed the split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. See, Orthodox churches, they're not Protestant churches. That's a totally separate movement that came years afterwards. 500 years or something like that. So, we talk about Babylon being false church systems. Why don't we include the Orthodox Church in that? That's just a big question mark in my mind. I think it's, so that's all I'm going to say about that. I think we should look into that a little further. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, let me just put some stuff out here. I'm just going to speak just openly here. it's unfortunate that there's so much division among the Church of God. It really is. It's a sad thing. Because I think if everybody was working together and we could see more of the gifts in operation, I don't think God's going to bless the Church of God the way it's all split up. About the time he started giving somebody the gift, they would use it to benefit their group or promote their group. Oh, we got the gift and y'all don't have it. Stuff like that. And I know it's horrible to think that way, but I tell you, there's so much hostility between these groups. It's horrible. And so I think it's time and high time that all these divisions be forsaken, all the holy join in one. Don't that sound familiar? We sing about it, right? Why don't we practice it? Because I think it would be a benefit to the church overall for people to put aside these petty little things, differences, these doctrinal differences, these personal convictions, these traditions, and come together as one. We need each other. And the day's probably coming. The way this world's progressing, the wickedness, we are really going to need each other. It ain't going to matter if somebody trims their hair or somebody don't trim their hair. That ain't going to that when you need somebody praying for you, you're not even going to think about little details of people. Somebody, does he have a beard or does he not have a beard? Does he have a necktie or does he not wear a necktie? If he has a necktie, I can't call him to pray for me. It's ridiculous. It's time to stop all that. It's time to not be so divided up over doctrine. If we love each other and we have differences, why can't we come together and just share our differences and try to work things out? For the good of the church and for the good of the people of God. I don't understand why the leaders can't do that. But it's time that happens. And I'm glad to hear that there are people talking about it. We're in this fourth generation era now, and the young people, they're not concerned about the fights that their parents and their grandparents had. They want to be friends and they want to have fellowship with other people, and I'm glad to see that. I'm very glad to see that. And of course, I don't. Well, anyways, I'm glad to see people having a little bit more open. Now there's the diehards, and they're gonna go to their grave thinking that their 5 congregations are the true Church of God. It's gonna happen. You ain't gonna change their minds. And you can't change their minds. But someday they're going to have to give an account for that. That mindset. Somebody's going to have to give an account for that. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would like to see some prophecy-oriented people that have gifts. Saints, solid saints of God. Stop all this, the fussing and petty fussing and fighting, and start working together. And make an effort to re-examine where things went awry and try to determine where the church actually is now in time and what may be out ahead. Why don't we turn this thing around and try to figure out what God might have in store for us for the future? I've said it so many times throughout these series. Prophecy's looking forward. You shouldn't have to be a historian to go and have to dig back and find dates of things that happened years ago. Prophecy is looking forward. And so we need some people who are gifted and who have an interest in these kind of things that can get together and pray together, study together, and work some of this stuff out. Maybe I know there's I see diversity as a good thing. Getting a bunch of people, they don't have to even all think alike, but just to run their ideas by each other. Here's how I'm thinking. This is why I'm thinking that. I think that would be so neat. I don't personally want to be part of that process. I'm speaking very frankly here when I say this. I'm not a prophecy-oriented person. My gifting is, number 1, loving God supremely and loving my neighbor as myself. For me, acts of service and acts of kindness are high up on the list. That's just the kind of person that I am. I'm not into all this types and shadows and prophecies. There is a place for it, and I know it's a lot of people live and breathe this stuff, and that's great. I'm thankful for them. I'm not one of them, and I wouldn't even want to be part of that process. Just putting that out there. Okay, next thing is we all recognize that we're living in perilous times. I think all you have to do is look around and see we're in perilous times like never before. And I really do believe that the time is ripe for recurrence of gifted prophets to sound the warning. We need people that not only can speak, as God gives them utterance. That's what a prophet is, but also to be able to work in this prophecy, foretelling aspect of it. I mean, the Church of God's become a non-profit organization. And I'm not talking about, 501c or whatever that non-profit thing. I'm talking about we don't hardly have any prophets, if we even have prophets. I'm talking about true prophets, not somebody said, well, here, you can be a prophet, and you can be an apostle, and you can be a blah blah blah, and they give it, as the Revelation says, they gave gifts one to another. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people with genuine giftings. We need that. And I think if there would be interest in that, God would, why would God not bless that? Why would God not want to give that gift back to the body? It's very much needed. Probably greater than ever before, because it's getting bad. You can't listen to the news. You can't pick up a newspaper or go online and read an article and not see how things are worsening. So it's high time that we get some gifted people in the body with these gifts operating. And then I mentioned this already, the third earthquake symbol. If it is indeed out there, which kind of sounds like it is, I can't point to a time in the seventh seal where there's been a great earthquake. Not like it's described in Revelation. I don't see that. So what is that? What might that look like? The time is now to understand it and to prepare ourselves for it. Okay, all right. So where do I go from here? Well, I have a number of other podcasts I'd like to do, and I'll just share with you since this is my last episode in this series. I want to do a podcast series on a school that was created by those 1948 brethren that came out, conservative brethren. They actually opened up a school called the Ministers and Missionary Training School in Plymouth, Indiana. And it operated for a number of years up until the 50s, and then it just closed. But it had the support of a lot of leading ministers. Fay Stewart was part of that. She came there and visited. Phyllis Martin, who went with Fay Stewart down to Cuba, she went through that school and was trained to that school. Brother Ralph Farmer. There's a lot of people that went through that school, and they went all over the place. They went to world missions. They went to congregations in the U.S. And would labor there. They had a good thing going there, and I've been able to find out a lot of good stuff about that school, the curriculum, and kind of to kind of tell the story, and I would like to do that someday. I've actually started that process now. So that's another episode series I'd like to do. And then also, I alluded to this early on, but there were racial issues that developed in the early years of the Church of God. A very unfortunate thing, because the Church of God had been known for being racially diverse, even in the face of opposition. And then in the teens, right after the turn of the century, in the teens, the church was divided over race. And so I'd like that story to be told in a fair and balanced and unbiased manner, and just basically go by, by the facts and see where they lead us to. That's another series. And then also, as we all know, there's been a number of instances in Church of God history where the issue of sanctification has been discussed, and the entire fellowship was separated over that teaching back in the 70s. We've read about what happened in 1899 and the issues back there. And I would like, so let me tell you a little bit of background. So I attend, when I'm in Ohio, I attend meetings with people in the Church of God, and we all don't have the same background. We got people there that was brought up in 2 cleansings. We got people that was brought up in 1 cleansing. We got people that was the no necktie at one time. We even got one individual that was part of restoration. So we have a diverse set of people. And by the way, we love each other. We don't let the stuff get in our way. We just don't. And so I having been around people and loved on people and been loved by people on both sides of this issue, and realizing that in a practical sense, these groups are pretty much all the same. There's things they don't do, the things that they do there. None of them have any bragging rights over the other one. And a lot of these things that they've been divided over is just, I call them holiness competitions. Somebody trying to prove that their group or they're more holy than the next group. And I'm just saying it bluntly, but that's the conclusion I've reached. I have looked into this, and I've shared this presentation with people on both sides of that issue. And when we got done with that, what we said? Well, we didn't know we were so close. Because our leaders, unfortunately, have focused so much on the differences with regard to sanctification that they ignored the similarities. And so I'd like to do a presentation on that. A series of presentations to show people where we're alike, where we think the same, and where the differences are. And you'll find, I believe, that the differences are much more minor than all the similarities that we have. And that's that's principle. Church of God has not done justice in dealing with matters of dispute, doctrinal dispute. They can believe 99.9% of the same thing, but they'll have that one little difference, and they split over it. I'm telling you, division is in our DNA, and it's time to stop it. It's time to get beyond all that. These are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and we need to be together. And so I think if we saw this kind of laid out that way, I know. There's some of them wouldn't even give it the time of day to even listen to something like that, and that is what it is. But there are others, I think, that would give it consideration and at least listen. Just listen. So I would like to do a podcast series on that. Also, the teaching of eldership. There's a move, and there has been, and I was involved in that, about 18, 19 years ago, something like that, where we started looking at eldership. And the Church of God has originally practiced eldership. In fact, that's how I found out about it. I was reading one of the 7 seal or 6 seal books, and it talked about eldership. And we didn't even, in the group I grew up, we didn't even hardly use the word elder. It wasn't, or unless we were talking about somebody old, but we didn't hardly use the word elder. And I remember one time counting how many times the word elder was in the New Testament. I was like, whoa, why don't we even use this language? We say that we nothing but the Bible. And so I would like to do a presentation that a brother and I gave. Like I said, I think it's probably about 18 years ago or so. And no, maybe even 19 now, I don't know, where we presented the idea of biblical eldership or plural leadership. And I would like to look at that series of podcasts from a biblical, a historical, and a practical perspective. So I think that would make it interesting. Plus, that would clear up a lot of people's understanding. Whenever we presented the eldership teaching, there was a lot of stories that went out, a lot of rumors, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I think if people, and I know people didn't base their opinions on what was actually taught. You know how I know that? I got the master tapes, and no one's ever heard the master tapes. I've got them. So for sure, people haven't heard what eldership is from the perspective of how we taught it. But some people going around here thinking that they know. So I think it would be nice just to get that out there so it's transparent. Everybody see this is what we taught. We've been practicing eldership for all these years, and it's been a great experience. So we'd like to share that with other people. There are other congregations that are starting to see that there needs to be accountability in this process. It's not about one person. It's not a one-man show or one-woman show. Leadership in a congregation should not be in the hands of one person with no accountability. And so just that's not healthy, and we can see where that's got us to. So I'd like to do a series on eldership. And then also, I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, which is, we have a lot of Church of God congregations there. The movement was very strong. This is where Barney Warren lived and preached and based his ministry out of. He did a lot of traveling, but he was from Springfield. He's buried in Springfield. And I just want to tell the story about how the Church of God came to Springfield and how the congregations, got established and so forth. It's just it's really kind of a neat story. And then also I'd like to talk about Barney Warren himself and the influence he had on in Springfield, Ohio. He was a great songwriter, but beyond being a songwriter, he was a very gifted minister. And so I just want to talk a little bit about him. So, okay, so with that, I had a few some people I talked to, and it's some people say, well, hey, Brother Dan, it's like I wanted to go back and visit the series that you talked about, and I'll just use an example, John Wesley. But I didn't know which one it was because you just got episode 1 through 20 through 23, and now we're on 24. I didn't know which one to go back to. I forgot which one it was. So I spent some time today going and made an outline. And what I'm going to do, starting, I believe in the next slide, I'm going to just let this outline run. I'm not going to say anything, so I'm going to close out here in a second. And so it will be there, and you can go back in this YouTube video when I get it uploaded. You'll be able to go back, and if you want to look for a certain part, you can scroll, and you can find where that's at. So I have a chart for each episode, and I have the main highlights of each one episode on the charts. So that would make it easy for all of you that are interested in going back and looking at a certain episode and spending more time with it. It would help you find it. And eventually I would like to, I didn't know how to do this, but I think I figured it out, a way to put this information in the data associated with each episode on YouTube so that you could do a search maybe and find it that way as well. I'm not the greatest when it comes to IT. I had to learn all this doing it, so I know I've probably not done the greatest job as far as laying all this stuff out technology-wise, but I did the best I could do, and I have learned some things as we got going through it, and so anyways, so I'm just going to let this run, and then when it's in, I'll just hit stop and we'll be done. I'll get this uploaded. But let me thank you all again. So this is from my heart here. Thank you all for your time. I know this has been probably a challenge. I can tell you there's some people's going to love it and some people's going to hate it. There's going to be some 6 seal people that's not going to, you're going to be happy about some of the things I said about them, but they're not going to be happy about some things I said about the 7 seal. The 7 seal people is going to be happy about some things I said about them, but they're not going to be happy about some other things. You know, my goal in this was to just present the facts, and I don't want to say this in a mean way, but let the chips fall where they may. I just wanted to tell the story. I tell you all, I love all of you. You know, I love everybody. I didn't say anything to hurt anybody or to make anybody look bad. I have nothing but respect from these brethren, the ones that we've been talking about, these leaders. They had a lot of good things about them, a lot of good things. But they got some things wrong. And I probably got some things wrong that I believe right now. You know, and if I do, hopefully God shows me. None of us are past making mistakes, or not. You know, I don't claim to have the full truth. I know what I do have. I believe it to be true, but I don't know that I have all the truth. So I found out since I've been saved, I was taught some things that wasn't right, and I've come to the discovery of some other things that I wasn't taught one way or the other. And so my goal in all this was not to, not to hurt people's feelings or necessarily take sides. I still haven't told you where I stand on all this. You can probably figure out some of it just by listening. But to be truthful, I don't know where I stand on some of this. I'm still on a journey, and I'm not at the end of the way yet. Thank you for listening. I hope you didn't get upset with anything. If you did, feel free to contact me. I'll try to explain it to you. If there's something I need to correct, I'll correct it. But it's been fun, and it's been fun sharing this. And so I know these things are long. I don't know how many hours of lecture there is on this, but it's a long time. So if you made it to this one, thank you so much for listening. And I really do appreciate it. And I'd love to hear from you. You know, contact me at my email address, which is right here at the bottom. There's contact information there. And I'd love to hear from you. So Lord bless you all. We'll see you next podcast series.